Assalamu alaikum and good evening, everyone. Welcome you all to our ACFE Oman first webinar session. Let me introduce my team. We have joined by Mr. Khalil Al-Rawahi, President of ACFE Oman chapter, Mr. Murad Al-Baloshi, our Vice President, Mr. Jose Chaku, Past President, Ms. Fathiya Al-Maskari, Director Training, Mr. Prashant Bafna, Board Secretary, Mr. Ramanda Prabhu, Treasury and International Relations Director, Mr. Haytham Al-Raisi, Director Membership, Mr. Salim Al-Mushafri, Director at Large, and myself, Hassan Ahmed, Director Media and Technology. Today, our first webinar of the year 2023. And the topic is Governance, Risk and Compliance, GRC. And we have a very renowned speaker, Mr. Venkatesh. So without any further delay, I would request Mr. Khalil Rawahi for the welcome address. Over to you, Mr. Khalil.
Thank you, Hassan. Thanks a lot. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening to all. On behalf of ACFE Oman chapter, it's given me a great pleasure to greet you all, invitees, guests, and members of ACFE Oman chapter, and my fellow board members for the first virtual CBE webinar under the new board. We also welcome our past president, Mr. Jose Chaku, immediate past president. Life is a journey of continuous learning. We will continue to learn. There is no end for learning. In this part of learning journey, with all of the efforts of the past presidents, past board members, and my fellow board members of that chapter, we have been instrumental in fulfilling one of the Oman's need in Connected Oman and ACFE USA for capacity building of Omani fraud professionals and continuously upgrading ourselves into the new world of challenges and future ready. Your new board has a lot of new learning initiatives and people to people connect there by individual prosper, family prosper, and community prosper, and all stakeholders prosper. We also thank Dr. Zahran Asalti and all his team members for their support to ACFE Oman chapter over the years and look forward to their support as the journey continues. We also have with us very learned speaker, Mr. Venkatesh Kallur. I don't know if I announce your name correct or not. Sorry for that. Will take us Kallur, yeah. Will take us through the topics governance, risk, and compliance, which is a fundamental pillar of any organization. Once again, welcome each one of you to this CBE webinar and wish you all happy learning. Stay connected with ACFE Oman chapter and look forward to your continuous support. Without further ado, and hereby hand over the proceedings to Mr. Hassan to take this forward. Over to you, Hassan.
Thank you so much, Mr. Khalil, President of ACFE Oman chapter. Now I would request Ms. Fathiya to introduce our speaker.
Warm welcome to our members and non-members of ACFE in our first ACFE training activity for this year. Mr. Venkatesh is the expert on the field, which being the subject of the today training, which I will not go through because he will cover it. But I want to give a small introduction about Mr. Venkatesh to get to know that he is the expert on this field. He is an international banker and a senior governance, risk, and compliance management executive, seasoned governance, enterprise risk management, and compliance executive with strong foothold in risk strategy, credit, market, and operational risk, along with enterprise risk management, experience in leading the executive management and various boardroom meetings in the subject area of strategy, credit, Basel, Solvency II regime, and enterprise risk management. Keynote speaker and writer on various risk subject area in international risk and banking forums, leadership coach and mentor with accomplished experience across banking and financial services. So he is the best on these subjects, and welcome, sir. You can start with your session, please.
Thank you, Fatia. I really appreciate it. Khalil, thank you so much, and the other board members of ACFE. And my association with ACFE, I guess it's about 4 years now. I've been on and off doing sessions directly with ACFE and through CBFS and so on and so forth. And thank you very much again. Okay, let me screen share it. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Primarily today, I'm going to focus on governance, risk, and compliance from a chief risk officer's perspective. See, every subject, you know, if you ask a room of people, describe an elephant, everybody has their own way of description. Now, similarly, for a governance, risk, and compliance, chief risk officer being the owner of these three functions in any enterprise, his perspective is predominantly very important from a board perspective and from a board risk and compliance perspective. And that's what I'm going to discuss today and present you some of my thoughts and experiences, and also would like to leave some of the thoughts on the table for you to take away as food for thought. Now, as part of today's discussion, I would like to talk about GRC framework, giving you a big picture. And what are some of the objectives of GRC framework, and what is its mandate looks like, and what are its roles and functions looks like. And when we talk about GRC framework on the ground, what do we deliver to an organization? And as a chief risk officer, what will be his mandate with respect to GRC framework? And then within the GRC framework, we talk about corporate governance framework. What does GRC assessment mean? And operational risk management, CRO's viewpoint, and information security risk management and CRO's viewpoint. And I'm sure all of you coming with fraud risk management experience, you must be wondering why fraud risk management is not mentioned as part of GRC. I'll keep that as a point as we progress. Now, if you look at GRC framework, if you take it from a big picture perspective, you have governance, you have risk, and you have compliance. Each one of these has its own role as a vertical pillar, and let's talk about it. Now, from a statutory perspective, you have various laws, you have various regulations, and you have various statutes instituted by the sovereign, and those need to be looked at from a governance perspective, and those need to be institutionalized in an organization based on what kind of rules and regulations are there. Then you have various ISO standards, and you have National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is primarily an United States organizations and corporates that are being there, and various policies, be it in the organization or be it in the information technology or be it in information management or be it in business lines or be it in compliance. Various contractual commitments, that is, be it PCI, which is payment cards industry, and or customer contracts or B2B agreements or B2C agreements that need to be looked at, and various processes and procedures, which is NIST CSF, which is cybersecurity framework. You have ISO, be it 27001 or 31000 or COSO, various organizational frameworks, and various controls that need to be put in place as part of governance, administrative, physical, and technical. Now, let's take for a minute a step back here, and I would like to spend some time on governance here, because governance is the backbone of GRC. And if the governance is weak in an organization, then the rest of the things will actually go south. What does that mean? In my experience of 37 years across continents and countries, I have seen whereby various organizations would like to use this fancy word of governance, risk and compliance, GRC, but they won't give enough power on the ground to implement it and to institutionalize it. The moment there is no power given to the GRC function, it's literally having absolutely no use having that function. It's only a waste of resources in the institution or in the bottom line of the organization if enough truth is not given. Out of that, governance. Within that governance framework, what are we talking about here? The governance of the board, governance of various board constituted committees, be it audit committee, be it the nominations and remunerations committee, be it board audit committee or board risk committee, or various management committees, be it investment committee or credit committee or risk management committee or operational risk management committee or information security management committee. All of these will come into play. And how is the roles and responsibilities defined within these committees? How is the conflict of interest is addressed within these committees? And how are the members being constituted? Who is the chair of these specific committees? And what is the role of each member within this committee? And how are the conflicts of interest have been managed between the chair and various chairs of other committees? These are all the sensitive items with a lot of political dynamics around it. You need to steer them carefully across and make sure those are addressed thoroughly right from the day one. This is a very, very critical component within the GRC component, within the GRC framework. Governance plays a vital role. I cannot emphasize more than that. Then comes the risk management. When we talk about risk management, it is sizing the beast, the one you are going to handle. Based on the business model of any organization, risk management holds a very vital aspect of it, and it is transparent to the lines of businesses, be it insurance, be it banking, be it energy, be it telecom, be it corporate, or even a bakala shop in the corner of the street. There is a risk involved based on the business model of the organization, and those risks need to be identified, and those need to be addressed proactively, assessed and managed. You know, as the old saying goes, if I can recollect from my grandmother days, if you don't know how to measure, you don't know how to manage. Risk is also exactly like that. If you don't know how to measure a risk, if you don't know how to assess a risk, you don't know how to manage it, plain and simple. Now, within the organization, you have tier 1, which is across the organization, tier 2 across the business lines, and tier 3 is across the assets. This is how we do the risk assessment. Now, we touch upon each one of those as we progress. Now, when we look at the risk assessment, we look at continuous compliance. We look at how do we secure the systems. We look at how do we make our workforce responsible and accountable to various risks that they are being handling by nature of the business model. And how do we make sure that information and knowledge about the risks has been disseminated across the organization, so that whether it is the employee or the middle management or the senior management or the various risk management committees or various board committees or the board itself, how are they making their decisions which are risk informed? And based on this, we also look at how do we make organization sustainable, repeatable and dependable, which is resilience of the organization with respect to risk management framework. Once we accomplish this, then we talk about how do we improve this excuse me, on a continual basis, and how do we take from point A to point B to various maturity models, which I will talk about as we progress under CRO mandate. Then we'll discuss more about it. Now, once we have this, let's talk about the systems authorization, be it NIF risk management framework or ISO or COVID. We need to, how do we categorize various systems that we are exposed to due to the business model and various risk assessments that we do. Various control frameworks that are needed in terms of, you have control frameworks under various levels. You have control frameworks under compliance, you have control frameworks under governance, you have control frameworks under risk management. You need to have those in place in a proactive manner rather than reactive manner. And then we talk about, once we identify the control frameworks at each level, we look at how do we implement them and how do we institutionalize them so that we embed this control framework on a day-to-day basis for an employee on the ground. Once we implement this control framework, it's important we need to, before we institutionalize those control frameworks, we need to assess the effectiveness of these controls in terms of how good is my control? Is it too much of a control, or is it too less a control, or can I calibrate either too less or too high? Then we need to bring in a system to authorize these controls to take it across the organization so that they are sustainable, dependable, and repeatable. Once we have that in place, then we need to look at continuously monitoring the system, excuse me, sorry, and then go back into a 360-degree view of. Then we'll talk about various compliance related stuff. First is identify all the maturity of the compliance related policy framework that is needed. We need to look at the threat landscape. We need to look at the implementation aspects of it. We need to look at the insider behaviors. And then we need to look at, under self-assessment, we need to look at systems, processes, and audit preparations. Now, under the external audits, we look at regulatory audits. We look at various standard audits with respect to COSO framework or ISO framework or various Basel framework, or even, NIST, CSF, or RMF, which is a cybersecurity framework and risk management framework. And then, as a chief risk officer, when you are owning the GRC framework, you have an obligatory fiduciary responsibility in terms of reporting it from a transparency perspective, from a regulatory perspective, from an audit perspective, be it internal or regulator, or be it from a KYC perspective to your shareholders, to your board of directors, to your board nominated committees, to your management committees, so on and so forth. Now, here comes the crux of it. Fraud risk management falls across all the three: governance, risk, and compliance, because fraud risk management and operational risk management. Fraud risk management is an inherent pillar of operational risk management. Information security management is an inherent aspect of operational risk management. Why do we say that? It's primarily because from a capital charge calculations perspective, fraud risk management and information security risk management and operational risk management fall under one bucket. That's why we bring it under that. And then, in fact, I'm very proud to say, not because I'm in this forum, but I always say this: I highly encourage my staff to go on to a 360-degree view of learning on a continuous learning basis and get themselves certified, be it ACFE certification, or be it Basel certification, be it project management certification, or be it risk management certification, or various compliance or governance related certifications. It's very critical. What does these certifications mean to an individual? It's not that they will make you a guru of the subject, but when I see getting an employee on board for a governance, risk, and compliance function, an employee who is a prospective employee who is certified versus not certified, it gives me a comfort feeling that somebody who is certified means he understands the big picture of the framework that is there for the role that I'm hiring him, be it for governance, be it for operational risk, be it for compliance, be it fraud risk management, or be it for information security management, what have you. Any of these certifications means it's an external endorsement that makes even an organization should get endorsed externally. ISO 31000 certification, a GRC organization should get certified with that. The next one I'm going to talk about is some of the objectives of, at a high level, some of the objectives of GRC framework. See, governance, risk, and compliance, it should have a maximum, optimize the returns while meeting the stakeholders' expectation. It's a risk versus reward dynamic. As we all know, in any organization, shareholders seek maximum return, and they don't appreciate unexpected volatility in any of their performances or any of the information flow. That's why I always emphasize on, I would always rather take a risk of repetition rather than risk of assuming that I already communicated. So from a board of directors perspective, They should oversee the assurance function from a GRC perspective, framework perspective, and management requires an economic return for an appropriate GRC implementation in managing the risk and in managing the compliance, in managing the governance function. And typically the regulators from insurance or any other external rating agency, ECA we call it, rating agencies, external rating agencies, they look at how is your internal controls and how is the solvency of the organization itself in the light of the risk adjusted capital that is required in terms of managing the function. See, when we talk about capital, we talk about economic capital, we talk about risk capital, we talk about regulatory capital. All of these capitals are needed from a solvency perspective, and that's where the regulators and rating agencies will always look at it. Now, what are the other things the regulators look at? Better disclosures, what we call in Basel III as Pillar 3, in Basel II or Basel III or Basel IV, or even in Solvency II standards, we call it as Pillar 3 disclosures, which is nothing but market discipline and a common denominator for the shareholders and for the board members to disclose that what we have been doing internally, we need to disclose it so that everybody has the same measure or the common denominator to measure the performance. Now, GRC is the core function with a board oversight, not only a control and compliance function, but it is also an inherent part of doing your business. Because at the end of the day, don't forget, business is the first line of defense. When business is doing it, if you are not educating them on the GRC function, they don't know what kind of risk that they are signing up for. How do we educate the business with respect to various GRC functions? Is primarily through various awareness and training sessions and various other policy framework, meaning we look at first risk appetite framework, we look at various target market criteria and the risk acceptance criteria, so that a relationship manager, be it in a bank or in an insurance segment or any other telecom segment, when he is looking at the targeting customer or a target market, he would be guided by these policy frameworks, so that he is not bringing in, that is wasting his time in the market by bringing in a customer who is not his target market. And bear in mind, when you are bringing in such customers on board, the risk must be identified in a proactive manner. They should be assessed, they should be quantified. If required, a strategy should be put in place to mitigate them in the event when the risk comes. If not, we should manage, organization should own those risks, and for owning the risk, you should be able to quantify that risk so that they are all managed at all levels. Now, risks affecting particularly the shareholders must be evaluated in a proactive manner. That's what the risk appetite is all about. As a chief risk officer, if I am going into the board, if I am putting up a document called Risk Appetite Framework and Policy, by the way, there's a fantastic guidelines provided by Financial Stability Board of UK on the Risk Appetite Framework, published in 2016, sometime in November 19th, I guess. They published a document called Risk Appetite Framework, and which is phenomenally enriched document. A lot of sovereign banks, including in the region, have mandated it to be used by various financial services industry, and I highly recommend all of you to read that. And the Risk Appetite Framework and document is nothing but a framework that, as a chief risk officer, I am sitting in front of or standing in front of my board and communicating to them. My fellow board members or my board members, kindly listen to this. These are all the risks as per the business model the organization is signing up for. If push comes to shove, if any of the risks come onto the balance sheet, this is what you are signing up for to lose that money. It's not that you have given me a blank check, but this is the amount of money that you will lose out of the bottom line. Are you prepared to lose based on the business model that you have conceived? And that's what I'm asking them to sign off. And it's a very, very critical document, because this is a document, it's a common denominator between me, my board, my various board nominated committees, my management committees, and my executive management. So it's a very, very important document that gets published in the 4th quarter of every year for the following year. And then, based on this risk appetite framework and target market criteria and risk acceptance criteria, management must instill accountability and responsibility for GRC at all levels. be it at an individual junior most employee to the middle management, to the senior management, to the executive management, to the various management committees and various board risk committees. There is an accountability at every level, including even the risk appetite framework. There is an accountability at every level that needs to be drilled down, that needs to be managed, that needs to be communicated, and that needs to be measured and reported to various reporting authorities, including the regulators. Let's look at some of the mandates of GRC. GRC should operate within the paradigm of risk versus reward, integrity, and adherence to various laws, regulations, and internal policies. For this, underlying assumption going into this is you have a certain maturity model to measure your applicable laws, to measure your regulations, and there is a certain level of maturity in your internal policy framework. And then integrity is all about GRC framework. And also, my role as a chief risk officer heading the GRC function is I should be able to assist my guide. I should be able to assist my board and guide my board. I should be able to assist my audit committee. I should be able to assist my risk management committee and my management committees and executive management at various levels. Excuse me. So that they will effectively visualize or make them understand the 360-degree view of risks that are there. And why do you need a GRC framework? It helps the organization to align its information technology with its business objectives while managing various risks that are there, be it operational risk, be it credit risk, be it market risk, be it strategic risk, be it reputational risk, be it various, if it is an Islamic institution, Sharia non-compliance risk, and various liquidity risk, interest rate risk in the banking book or non-banking book, or investment risk, so on and so forth. All of these need to be measured and monitored for regulatory compliance and being reported at the appropriate forums. And GRC function achieves organization business objectives. The reason why I emphasize here is, in the absence of GRC function, ignorance is bliss. When you don't know that you have a risk, it's like water flowing under the mat. You think your mat is good until the full mat is wet. By then it's too late. So for that perspective, proactive GRC framework implementation and management in an organization is very, very critical. And to instill good business practices into day-to-day life with every single employee in the organization, more so in the support functions, in the business roles, in the control functions, it's very, very critical. And when you synchronize this information and activities across governance, compliance, the organization and the various functions of the organization will act very efficiently and effectively and in a sustainable and repeatable manner, so that you can institutionalize this GRC function across the enterprise. Now, it gives you, framework gives you a very coordinated function, over various activities, in the sense it will eliminate all the duplication of work and overlapping, and then usage of resources will be optimized, so that chief risk officer can make sure well coordinated function is given between. I'll give you a simple example. To take compliance function, if compliance is doing a checklist of policies, whether which policy is getting matured or which policy is getting expired when, that is not actually the compliance function. That is the core function of operational risk. So if it is under CRO, under Chief Risk Officer, the GRC function, he will make sure all the policy related maturity things are all mandated under operational risk, because when operational risk goes into the field for doing their control risk and self-assessments and publishing their key risk indicators and key control parameters, they will make sure all these policies are mandated and they are fit for purpose. What does compliance do then? Compliance takes the list of all the inventory of all the policies in the organization. They prepare a compliance checklist of all the policies, make sure these policies are all fit for purpose, and they do a proactive management of these controls of all these policies, and checklist of those published, and then they publish it on a quarterly basis to various committees, be it in the management committees or be it in the board nominated committees or to the CRO. Then the leading question comes after this is, what does audit do then if compliance is checking these policies? Audit comes in a reactive manner, post facto, after the policies are published, after the year is getting done. Audit does the checklist, they publish their audit report, and that audit report goes back to the operational risk, because operational risk and audit, they have to work hand in hand under RBIA framework, meaning risk-based internal audit framework. So operational risk takes these policies and that takes the audit report and reviews that report and identifies all the risks that are there in the audit report, and they use it in their next cycle for a given function to do their RCSA, which is risk control self-assessment, and then publish it accordingly in that. I hope I'm. Next is GRC roles and functions. Under its roles and functions, you have external stakeholders, be it regulators, be it your external auditors, be it your rating agencies. You have your board of directors. You have a function to achieve with each one of those. With external rating agents and regulators, it's the constant relationship management, communication in a very transparent manner, including to your board communication, various reporting, various functions, various risks that you have reporting into the board, and then reporting into the executive management, and active participation in business strategy. Now, I have seen in various organizations, in various regions, the business strategy remains an artifact that stays in the lockers of various executives. That has to be institutionalized. I cannot emphasize more than this. There is one document that needs to be institutionalized, including your T-boy on the flare should know, is business strategy. The moment you apply your business strategy, you publish your business strategy, once it is approved, it has an oversight function. On that, the chief risk officer will come out as part of his GRC function. He will come out with a risk appetite framework. That risk appetite framework, in synchronization with your business strategy, gets published to the board risk committee and to the board, and then it gets rolled out to the business and to the various, within the organization. Then comes your risk adjusted returns, because once you have the risk appetite, then we come into risk adjusted returns, and that gets allocated into. I work with CFO very closely, chief financial officer, make sure those risk adjusted returns are all done into the capital planning and budgeting area, and then accordingly resource and capital allocation come into play. Then comes your day-to-day GRC frame management, partnership for GRC, assessment and analysis, risk measurement and aggregation, which we talked about, GRC costing, because we talked about risk adjusted returns and economic capital earlier, I mentioned it, and those come into play. And then it's very important, you need to synchronize all these three functions through a GRC tool for monitoring and reporting, because manual monitoring and tool, you'll always have various errors, and repeatability and sustainability becomes very difficult. Hence, GRC automation and for monitoring and reporting is very, very critical, because these days regulators are becoming very tough, external rating agencies are becoming very tough, and auditors are becoming very tough. As a result, any manual errors that creep in, they come in with severe penalties to the institutions. So in order to avoid in a very proactive manner, it's important to have a GRC automation tool. Then you have the business management, and the GRC and business management, they work hand in hand very closely. Likewise, they work with executive management, and GRC management and executive management also, they work in hand very closely, and it's a both ways bidirectional communication flow. There is under the business management, you have the strategic goal setting, which happens usually in the 3rd, 4th quarters of the year, and then you have the business planning based on what you have. Then you have a risk return strategy, whereby you put your strategy in place, and accountability and responsibility in the sense risk avoidance, risk transfer through ensuring various risks that are there, mitigate the risk, retention, which is nothing but acceptance of the risk. If you are accepting the risk, that risk need to be calculated, and people need to have that risk, sized, so that management and the board knows how much capital is being assigned to that risk, because by nature of your business model, you cannot avoid that risk, but you have to accept that risk. As a result of it, you need to you need to size that beast, and accordingly capital needs to be assigned. Further continuing on the GRC roles and functions, one of the fundamental functions of GRC roles or function is policy setting and process development. There are various policies across the organization that need to be looked at based on the business model. Those policies and related processes, first you need to establish the policy. Once you establish the policy, then you will establish the procedures, related procedures, and you will establish the related processes. Now, policies are always approved by the board because they are very strategic in nature. They will not be changed between two. The cycle of the policy review is between 2 to 3 years, depending upon the organization, and they are usually approved by the board and board nominated committees. When it comes to procedures, procedures are always approved by the management at the management level. Even a chief risk officer approves the procedures. It doesn't go anything over and above that. And because they're prone for change, frequent changes as business rules change on the ground, so that's why we don't take them to the board on a regular basis. But what happens is anything that procedures that are changed, that are approved by the CRO, in the following board risk committee and the management risk committee, he keeps them informed as a matter of transparency between him and the board and management, so that they are well informed about those. And then when you are setting up the policies or procedures, it's a very, very critical. You go into a facilitative mode with relevant business units or support functions or control functions in developing those particular artifacts or documents. And then wherever it requires further approval, make sure they're reviewed, make sure all the stakeholders are on board, make sure everybody is happy with it, and then only take it up to the next levels for approvals. GRC is a control function. Being a control function, one tends to be judgmental. My word of caution here, with all my bald head here, having spent 37 years in the region across the globe as well, is don't be judgmental, but be an advisory and a consultative, and be it in a facilitative mode, so that when the GRC function is rolled out, you have very little resistance and people will embrace the change because GRC, you need to be the driver of the change. As a chief risk officer, you need to be driving the change. You need to be making the changes. You need to challenging the status quo. When you have this, your relationship management skills come into play, and your communication comes into play. Your fellow C-suite support comes into play. All of that are needed as part of this consultation and advisory roles. And then comes is approving. GRC provides various approvals to various business rules and business approvals with a veto right. Be it in the credit or investment side, you need to be extremely careful. And again, make sure your CEO or your C-suite members are all taken on board with all of this, so that you have everybody's support on board. And on an ongoing basis, you have a monitoring and control basis, so that you control and monitor them and make sure your control framework is assessed and measured on a proactive basis. Then comes is, what do we deliver as GRC framework? We deliver the policy framework, be it identify definition of the various risks. It's very, very critical in an organization to define all the risks, so that the nomenclature remains the same across the organization. And the risk principles are defined. Risk appetite is defined. Various policy frameworks, including the risk policy, is defined. Costing of various risks is defined. Capital allocation is done at each level. And then the governance management and compliance management has been mandated and institutionalized across the organization. Then comes underneath is strategic plan framework. Governance strategy, compliance strategy, risk strategy, overall business strategy, risk adjusted returns, return on capital. All of this have to be thoroughly defined and understood, and then comes into play. Where do we start from a GRC management framework perspective? First, we identify 360-degree view of risks, all the risks that are faced by a business model. We assess those risks, we mitigate those risks, and we manage those risks, and then we automate those risks and measure them and report to various regulatory or external agencies or auditors, and then this is a continuum cycle that goes through again. The mandate of GRC from a CRO perspective, what is the CRO's mandate with respect to GRC? See, he has to conduct a dynamic study. For example, if I take a role of a chief risk officer, which I have been handling for greater part of my career all through these years, my first would be I would conduct a diagnostic study of the organization within the first 6 to 8 weeks, so that I publish my mandate, make sure I have the study, which means what I'm trying to achieve here is I'm taking a snapshot of the organization, where it stands today vis-a-vis my industry best practices and various regulatory requirements that are needed in the organization. Once I have that, I will start taking the organization to the alpha level, meaning the sophistication level of the alpha is, which means I look at my policy framework, I look at my procedures, I look at my conflicts of interest, I look at the charters of various committees, and I look at them level. Then in the 24 to 36 months, I take them into a sophistication level of beta level, we call it. Beta level meaning it is one level below the higher maturity level. Usually it takes about between 2 to 3 years. And we look at various automation requirements, various gaps filling, maturity of the policy framework, maturity of the procedures, and various training that have been mandated, the level of institutionalization of various policies, various risks that have been there. How is the taxonomy of the risk across the organization? How is the understanding of the organization? All these are gauged through risk control self-assessments, operational risk, information security, fraud risk management, and credit underwriting framework. We'll assess those, and then going to the gamma level, which means highly sophisticated level of risk. I have seen various levels of sophistication in the region in certain extent. In Saudi Arabia, under SAMA as regulator, the maturity level of risk management or the GRC management is predominantly high, depending upon the certain organizations. I have seen that in Canada. I have seen it in Australia when it comes to operational risk. I have seen it in Europe, particularly the Germany part of it when it comes to credit underwriting. I have seen the investment part of it in North America. And then we go into review and improve on an ongoing basis, and then come back and assess it, and then take it on a continual basis. I will try to finish it by 7:50 and leave the last 10 minutes for any question and answers. I'll take another 5-6 minutes. Corporate governance framework. We need to establish the proactive corporate governance, right starting from the board to the CEO to the various management committees. Conflict of interest. How is the leadership and how is the integrity and ethical behaviors of the leadership and within the C-suite that need to be looked at. Effective review system is very important. Policy framework and procedure framework is very. See, the governance and review system are interrelated and they are very tightly integrated. If your corporate governance and your review system are not integrated, the organization, the governance framework will not work. They need to be tightly integrated and they have to be balanced very clearly. On the left side, you have the governance units, which means risk management and compliance. And then you have on the right side, you have various verification units, internal audit and quality control units. And then you have in the center, you have the business units, the backend processing units, the various line managements and various support functions. And then you also look at it independent control and see how it is. And how are we with vis-a-vis the vision statement sorry, and the corporate value system of the organization. Culture of honesty, integrity, and transparency is very, very critical to the corporate governance framework. And this is how the whole governance framework need to be rolled out and institutionalized. Then we talk about what does GRC assessment mean. You have governance risk, various risks are there. This is a 360-degree view of risk. Those need to be looked at. You have governance risk, you have compliance risk, you have liquidity risk, you have various other risks, you have concentration risk, you have strategic risk, you have credit risk, you have operational risk, you have reputational risk, you have interest rate risk in the banking book, and you have Sharia non-compliance risk, so on and so forth. And investment risk and solvency risk, these are all there. Those need to be looked at. Macroeconomic risk, they all come under other risks. These need to be looked at so that as a chief risk officer, when you're going into your management forums, or when you're sitting with your CEO, or when you're sitting with your board risk committee or with your board, you give a 360-degree view of these risks vis-a-vis the risk appetite established against these risks. All these risks, there is a risk appetite established, and that need to be benchmarked and reported to the board so that board sees clearly vis-a-vis what they have approved, what is the risk that they have been currently happening, and any escalations that are there. As a chief risk officer, you need to do that. I don't want to go into these details in the interest of the time, but I will leave it. I will share this presentation to ACFE so that they will circulate it to all of you guys. This is primarily the operational risk framework under GRC from a CRO view perspective. What is a self-assessment mean? What is a control self-assessment? What is the quantification, risk aggregation, various risk decisions that are taken, and how do we report all of this? This is a continual cycle, and it's mostly like a a very self-learning kind of a slide. For information purposes, I kept it so that you please look at it. Same thing here also, information security risk management from a CRO view perspective. Prepare for a risk assessment, conduct a risk assessment, communicate the results, and maintain the assessment. And various of these are there in the continual cycle inside. If you look at it, step 1 is preparation for risk assessment. Step 2 is conduct the risk assessment. Step 3 is communicate the results. Step 4 is maintain on a continual basis, and this goes on and on. Then comes is information security CRO viewpoint. We always assess the threats. We always look at the assets. We look at always what are the threats to those assets, and we also look at what are the vulnerabilities of those, and then address them on a continuous basis, and make sure when we talk about assets, we talk about not only the physical assets, people are those assets, intellectual property is assets, information is assets, data is assets, and the customer information is also an asset. We look at it from all of these perspectives. Before I conclude or leave the forum open, I would like to share some perseverance, some food for thought for all of you guys. You're seeing something on the slide here. There are 3 rats. This is a case study done by Harvard Business School, literally done by Harvard Business School, and I'm sharing the findings of this. They have taken 3 rats, they put them into these containers, and they filled them with water, as you can see in the picture. This is an actual picture of the case study taken. And they have assessed and seen how long these rats can survive in this water before they give up on their life. When they did this study, all the rats literally becoming unconscious within 60 seconds time frame. They took them out, they gave them the CPR, they dried them, they gave them some food, they energized them, and they put them back into these glass jars again. Take a guess. How long do you think these rats will take time before they give up again? Anybody has any guess here? I will share. People, when they did this study and before publishing the results, they went and did a survey in the market. People came up saying 1 minute, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, like that. For the surprise of all the survey participants, they survived for 60 hours, not 60 minutes, 60 hours. Why? There is something called mental strength and physical strength. First time when they were fighting with their physical strength. With the physical strength, they could only survive up till 60 seconds. Then when they were briefed again, when they were done, it's a known environment, known cycle, they increase their emotional intelligence and they increase their mental strength, and the mental objections that are there in the mind, they could overcome those. Physical objections are very easy to overcome. That's why when they were fighting against physical objections, they gave up very easily within 60 seconds in the first cycle. The second cycle, when they could overcome the mental objectives and increase their mental emotional intelligence, they went up to 60 hours. Imagine if that is applicable to rats, what can happen to us as human beings? That's why it's very, very critical we raise our emotional intelligence in our day-to-day work, be it in GRC function. It's because control function, you are not cheerleaders. You need to bear in mind, when you take up this role, you are not a cheerleader in the organization. People will hate you when you are working in the organization. I always used to tell my staff, if you are liked by people, which means you are not doing your job right. People will hate you when you are doing the job of GRC, because you are in the role of saying no to the people. But that no has to come in with a very lot of diplomacy, a lot of positive thought, and a lot of positive emotion. That's very, very critical. And that's why emotional intelligence, perseverance, and keeping that mental objectives have to be gone out, and then accordingly you give up those. So you overcome that within your own mental framework so that you will be able to face the external objectives. This is with this, I come to a grinding halt, and I'll open the forum for discussions. Can I stop my screen sharing?
Yes, sir. So there are a few questions.
Please.
What would you suggest to be an ideal governance risk compliance certificate?
For all three, there is no single certificate. There is no single certificate for any of them. For risk management, you have various certifications that are there. Within the risk management, you have, for credit, there is a separate risk. For market, again, it depends upon the career the individual is choosing. Now, if you are choosing a career in credit underwriting or credit monitoring or credit management, there are certificates involved with respect to Moody's and various other risk management certificates. GARP is there, Global Association of Risk Practitioners. There are certificates there. If somebody is pursuing a career in fraud risk management, there is a ACFE. We know that there is a fraud FRM certification. Similarly, if somebody is pursuing an operation risk, there is a certification. If somebody is pursuing in governance, there is a governance certification. If somebody is pursuing in compliance, there is a compliance certification. Because this is not an all-in-one sundry kind of a certification, because you need to understand something. GRC is an ocean by itself. It took me this long years to lose all this hair to get myself. Every day I learn something new in GRC. I learn what I don't know, and learning is always like that. The more you learn, the more you know that what you don't know. So that's why it is very important to keep the organization as a learning organization or a static organization. So keeping the organization live, it's always important to keep it as a learning organization. So certification means it depends upon the track of career that you take. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you. So the next question is from Muhammad Atif. Can you please explain what is concentration risk?
Concentration risk is it's a very good question. Concentration risk could be asset concentration, geographic concentration, people concentration, and I'll explain each one of those. Asset concentration means, or if, for example, if I'm in insurance segment, for example, I'm just giving an example. If out of my balance sheet, 80% is focused on auto insurance, then my asset is very concentrated. If I am in banking, if it is focused on retail, or if in the corporate, in the large corporate, or in the private sector, or in real estate, or in any of those manufacturing, that is concentrated. There is a model called for measuring the concentration risk. It's called Hirschman-Herfindahl index. It's a methodology by itself. It's a framework and model by itself. We use that in all our measurements of risk, and we measure that risk. Similarly, people concentration, meaning typically this is more prevalent in this part of the world. When a CEO comes to an organization from organization A to organization B, he brings with him his pocket by mistake or by consciousness bunch of resumes with him, and he starts hiring he builds a branch office of the previous organization, the new organization. I have seen that mostly prevalent in the C-suite. That as a CRO, you need to measure the concentration of people coming on board, because that can create imbalance in the organization, that can create mafias in the organization, that can create, people politics dynamics will change. That need to be balanced through HR and through the recruitment management process. Then comes is, the asset capital deployment. The concentration need to be looked at from a capital deployment perspective. How is the capital deployed? Is it focused only at one place, or is it diversified enough so that tomorrow if one asset collapses, enough capital is there to sustain the business economic capital? This is how the concentration risk is measured.
Thank you so much. Because of time constraint, we will take the last question by Ms. Fatma Lawati. How to set fraud risk appetite?
Fraud risk appetite, typically what happens is, okay, it's a very good question. Fraud risk appetite falls under operational risk. As I mentioned before, fraud risk management under capital management, information security, and fraud risk management, they fall under operational risk. The way we set up the operational risk appetite under for that covers our information security and fraud risk management is, in the beginning of the year, there is no scientific evidence for it. There is no quantitative models for it. It's all qualitative modeling based on the experience of the chief risk officer and the team that is handling within the fraud risk management we take. What we do is that we go into the history of the organization and look at how much frauds or operational risk happened in the last 5 years. How much is the thing that happened? How much money that is lost by information security, various vulnerabilities, various threats, downtime of the systems, various frauds that happened or potential frauds that happened, various operational risks that happened, be it system failure or people failure or policy failure, and capture those from the balance sheet in the last 5 years. Once we have those numbers in place, we try to keep it plus or minus 10%, but we establish this particular limit for each support function, for each line of business, for each unit within each line of business, and each function within the line of support functions, including risk management. Risk management and internal audit will have zero tolerance when it comes to this. So this is how we establish the risk appetite. Once we establish the risk appetite, we go into the last column called management action trigger. We call it MAT. See, risk appetite will have 3 columns always. Obviously, the name of the risk profile, the risk appetite, and then the risk limit, management action trigger. Management action trigger is nothing but you always keep it 10% the limit that has been approved by the board. And the risk profile is last balance sheet of the year. We take the snapshot of the year against this particular risk appetite and report it to the board. How is the board functioning with respect to all of these particular risks versus the profile? How is the profile of the organization? You report to the board. That's how you establish the management action triggers. And CRO is the single point of contact and accountable for monitoring the risks and reporting the management action triggers to the board and management action, and to the CEO and to the management committees. I hope I answered, Fatma. But yeah.
Thank you, sir. So there's a request from our member for more last question. We will say,
Please.
Can internal auditor also handle the risk management role too? Would you please suggest what is the relation between governance and quality? Is the quality assurance is helping governance and risk assessment?
Yes, it does. It does. Internal audit doesn't handle risk. I beg to differ on that. Internal audit actually audits the risk management also to make sure risk management is functioning the way it has been mandated by the board. And similarly, within the operational risk of the CRO, the operational risk, when they are conducting the risk control self-assessment, they also do it on internal audit. It's a both ways. So it's a dual control, meaning as part of risk control assessment, you go and do a risk control assessment on the internal audit people and make sure they are functioning as mandated by the audit committee, so that if there is any, because for example, if an internal audit fails, it's a failure on the organization. There's a major mishap happening. Now, so that is coming in, it's a dual control role from both sides. Both are control functions. So it's a both balancing act between the two, and that's how it is measured. Sorry, what is the other part of the question I missed? I think you're on mute.
Can internal auditor also handle the risk role?
No. Internal audit handles the risk role from an audit perspective. What happens is there is something, there is a framework within internal audit called RBIA. It's an International Institute of Audit Practice. There is a framework called risk-based internal audit. What that does is risk management, operational risk particularly, along with audit team, they sit together They go to each unit and see, then categorize the priority of the auditing requirements for the year. Internal audit publishes an annual audit plan. Similarly, operational risk publishes an annual operational risk plan. CRO publishes his annual risk management plan. So all these three have to go hand in hand. There's nothing like a one is superior, the other is an inferior. No. So what happens is when they identify based on the support function and various other control units, they identify the categories based on the risk according to the prioritization changes. Then the internal audit will audit high risk functions first, and then they go accordingly slowly. The priority changes. So that's how they work both. Risk management is always proactive, internal audit is always reactive. They are both complementary to each other.
Thank you so much. Now it's time to vote of thanks. I will call Mr. Haytham Al Raisi for formal vote of thanks. Over to you, Mr. Haytham.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It has been such an honor to be part of this wonderful webinar. On behalf of ACFE Oman chapter, I would like to thank His Majesty Sultan Haytham for providing us an opportunity to work as a chapter in Oman. I would like to thank Mr. Venkatesh for a wonderful presentation on GRC, and I'm sure there are lots of takeaways from your presentation. I would like to thank CBFS for sponsoring ACFE Oman chapter. Not to forget, our special thanks goes to our attendees and ACFE Oman chapter members for attending the session. See you in our upcoming session. Stay safe once again. Thank you so much for attending and have a good night. Over to you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Please stay tuned with our social media channels and see you in our next upcoming session. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you very much, Hassan and everybody at ACFE, and have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Mr. Venkatesh.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.